Hey, welcome back to Guy Shrink, the podcast where we talk about what keeps a guy awake at night, or sometimes we talk about what ought to keep a guy awake at night. We've talked about philosophy, we've talked about medical issues, we've talked about relationships, our kids, our spouses, our partners, working, what's work life like. We've had a couple of conversations about how to fire a friend when they get to be too nerve-wracking. Just did one that's coming out soon on revenge and resentment and why it becomes an addiction for most of us. But today we got to talk about some sports, some really good sports, basketball, in fact. Years ago, 100 years ago or so, when I was in graduate school in Minnesota, a buddy of mine that lived down the hall from me had a big sign on his door of his room, and it said, "Basketball saves." And Keith loved basketball, and we would go to all kinds of high school basketball games there and around town, as well as University of Minnesota was playing then. But today's guest is a good friend. I've known Dave for a long time, David Bensch, and he, with a buddy, Andrew, made about 15-month trek across the United States, interviewing 29 college coaches, basketball coaches, and wrote a book, wonderful, great book called, Destination Basketball, a once-in-a-lifetime adventure to meet the best coaches in college hoops. And that they certainly did. So, Dave, you want to introduce yourself a little bit and tell our listeners a little bit about yourself. You grew up in Oak Harbor, I think, Oak Harbor, Ohio, right?
That's right. Oak Harbor, Ohio. Bill, thanks for having me on. Yes, we've known each other for a while, and I always look forward to chatting with you. Just your enthusiasm, your curiosity, you're always a welcoming soul. So I appreciate that.
Thank you.
And yeah, I grew up in Oak Harbor, and my parents still live out that way. I went to college in Cleveland area, Baldwin Wallace and Berea, and then moved back here in the greater Toledo area. And so I've been an Ohio boy my whole life and currently live in Perrysburg and married to Mackenzie, have three young children. And yeah, I just feel very blessed. And, this project that we talked about, that we're going to talk about today, Destination Basketball, yeah, it's coming up on the 20-year anniversary of our first interview. So there's a lot of things that are kind of, as I reflect back on it, what it means, what it meant, and how it's impacted my life even still today.
Well, Dave, tell us a little bit about how you and Andrew just kind of woke up one day and said, "We want to do this." And how did you put that together, and what happened?
So Andrew and I, we've known each other since Little League Baseball. We've been great friends, and we still are great friends today. And we played all the sports together, and basketball was one of them. So we both graduated from Oak Harbor, and we had decided, we went to college, and Andrew ended up going to Beilein DGSU. And so we were at the summer before our senior year of college, and we didn't know what the future was going to hold. And we decided we wanted to do one big project together, or some sort of adventure. We would take road trips, during spring break or Christmas break. We would go to different colleges, and we took a trip to ESPN one year. And so we knew that we some sort of road trip. And we were, of course, we're big college basketball fans. And we thought, well, let's put together what we think current coaches. So this is back in 2006. Current coaches and, living coaches that have been successful in the college basketball world. And we had a list of about 30 or so that we thought, it'd be kind of cool to meet them. And Andrew had worked a little bit in the sports information, sports marketing department at DGSU. So he had a few connections. But what he did is there was a list of again, about 30, and we took the 5 or 7 that were regional. So being in Toledo, we could, message in Notre Dame or Ohio State or Louisville, Michigan State. And he reached out to some of the contacts there, secretaries, sports information directors, etc. And wouldn't you know, 5 days later, after we had thought of the idea, put the list together, we were driving down to Louisville, Kentucky to meet with Rick Pitino.
Oh, really?
And so, it was a shock, honestly. And going down there, we didn't know what to expect. And he was at a camp at the time. So they said that he had a few minutes to spare, and you could meet him. And that was what we expected. We could go in there and shake his hand. We did prepare 3 to 5 questions. And we got down there. We're sitting in the car parking lot, and we were nervous. We were still in college and didn't have much experience, and this is the first interview. So to get a name that big was, looking back, a linchpin moment. But we go in there and we kind of go back through and find his palatial office. It was amazing, and he extended his hand, and he couldn't have been more welcoming. We
Really?
we
Wow.
asked our questions, and he said, "No, stick around. Do you have any more questions?" We got a picture, and then we left. We recorded the interview, and we thought that was kind of interesting. And so throughout the rest of that summer, the summer of '06, we were able to then kind of leverage that experience and go to other regional areas coaches and say, "Hey, Coach Pitino was willing to say yes to this. Any chance that you would be around, or this coach, at Illinois or Wisconsin," and try to kind of build upon that list. It still necessarily wasn't a book project at that point. We just were thought it'd be cool to meet them and maybe ask them some questions. But the momentum was gaining, and eventually at the end of that summer, we thought, okay, we have enough here, and we think we can put it into a book eventually.
Wow. What a great project for a couple college guys to do.
It was insane. And then throughout that, what you said, 14, 15 months, we were still in school. I was in Cleveland, Andrew was in Bowling Green, and there was a lot of things that we would do in terms of, we would have class on Friday, and we would leave Friday night, go kind of a road warrior, weekend warrior, do an interview on a Saturday or Sunday, 15 hours round trip driving, and we would be back in class on Monday. Our parents, we would try to say, we're not missing any class for this. This is something that we're doing on the side.
Right.
It's not impacting.
I promise.
Exactly, exactly. So it worked out well that we could, do all of that. Now, the one thing that was interesting, it was, I graduated a semester early in December of 2006, and Andrew was finishing up his schooling there in May, but I also got married in February of 2007. So I was trying to juggle, my first job out of school, graduating, getting married, and then also doing this project. But we were so deep into the project, I couldn't be like, yeah, I'm gonna peace out now. It was fun looking back, that there was a lot of grace given to me, not only through Andrew and my wife Mackenzie, but also my employer. So it took a village to make this project happen. But yeah, I
Yeah.
reflect on that. I'm very, very appreciative of that.
Yeah. 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 I mean, professionally, I'm a therapist, and a lot of clients are couples, of course. And so I've done quite a bit of work with couples. And one of the things about couples, I've discovered that every relationship's got potential problems, and everybody brings a set of problems. I wonder if Mackenzie knew that she signed up with you, that she was going to get a book deal and the whole thing.
Yeah, it was tricky. And again, the grace, and it was managing relationships, communication. A lot of
Yeah.
it comes down to that. And so yeah, I'm very thankful for all of that.
Well, it's a great project, and it's a great little book. And so, what I'd like to do is just talk about a couple of coaches that both you and Andrew said were kind of favorites, and then we'll talk at the kind of the as we're done talking about coaches, we'll talk about the absolute greatest of all time college coach. So you mentioned Ohio State, and you said Thad Matta was one of your favorites. And so I'd like to talk a little bit about Thad and his tenure at Ohio State, as well as your take on that interview. And so you drove down to Columbus to talk to him. And of course, he's at St. John's Arena at that time, right? Shot scene wasn't built, right?
I believe so. I think that, that was a time where they were really rocking and rolling. That was where Greg Oden and Mike Conley, their team was in the national championships. And so he was kind of at the peak of his powers. He had spent some time at Butler, and he was, a great, of course, growing up in Ohio. I wouldn't say I'm quite a Buckeyes fan, a diehard Buckeyes fan, the way that my dad is, but I certainly follow along to know that it's it's definitely a cool thing to be able to go down to the campus and meet with Coach Matta.
Yeah. So what was that like? What was that interview like for you and Andy?
At that point, I feel like we felt like it was sort of on our home turf. So certainly meeting someone like that, there were still humility and respect and just appreciation for their willingness to give us their time. They're busy people. They're recruiting, they're coaching, it's all of these things. Their job description is just insane. So it really helped, I think, that we were a couple of college kids. It would be kind of weird now, that we're in our 40s to be like, yeah, we're going to do this project. I don't think we get the same reception. So their job, their number one job, and that came clear throughout all these interviews, is that they're trying to take 17, 18-year-old boys, and forever how long that they have them, hopefully 4 years, that they can set them up to be men. And they are really trying to instill that. So we kind of had the same approach where when we're meeting with coaches, Coach Matta, all the different ones, we are treating this as we want to learn more about life and leadership versus the X's and O's of basketball. They have reporters that are on the beat all the time that are asking them about the latest recruiting thing or the latest controversy. We stayed far away from that. So we wanted to ask things about their background, ask things about how they want to impact the kids. And so I think that helped too, that, the interview was just different. And, again, Coach Matta was another one that was just very, very, very open. And again, it helped us that we were coming down from Toledo.
Yeah, that's cool. You said about hearing about leadership and all those kinds of things in the interview process, and I think you kind of wrap up the book. You wrap up the book with a little interview with Jay Billis from ESPN.
Yes.
And I think he said that his experience with the two of you was really refreshing because it was just like sitting down and talking to a couple of friends as opposed to getting peppered by all these logistical questions. So
yeah, everyone's wanting to chase a headline. If you're a reporter and you want to get the latest kernel, and so I think that it helped. And Jay was so instrumental in making this project happen. He ended up writing the foreword for our book, and we made connection with him when he was actually at a golf outing, and he had wrapped up for the day, and it was a close drive for us, and he was pretty loose at the time, and he was just, if you've ever seen him on TV, he's very open, he's very, to the point, and he just was willing to share almost anything. So we did most of the legwork ourselves in terms of setting up the interviews, but Jay was nice to have in your back pocket. In other words, he of course has all the relationships too, so he could at sometimes, we could cash in some chips here, and he could set up some interviews for us as well. So Jay was amazing, and just have the greatest respect for him.
Yeah, just return back to Coach Matta. I know that one of the questions you kind of ask everybody, what kind of influences you've had, and right off the bat, he said, "My parents." That my parents were big influences, and he mentioned a couple of other coaches. And I thought, wow, for a successful man to credit his parents right off the bat was extremely important. Again, family values were coming out, at least for him.
Yeah,
I'm sorry. Yeah.
No, go ahead. Yeah, I think that at some point, we're kind of behind the scenes of college basketball, and they can coaches, players be put on a pedestal. They're you follow them like they're like the Beatles at sometimes. These coaches and players, and we have to remind ourselves that they're people too. They're humans, and an answer like that is very relatable. To talk about how much your parents had an influence on you, and how much they're still trying to, impact and nourish and nurture that relationship. That just makes them very relatable.
Yeah, for sure. I love the question you asked him about what's your favorite job. I think you said something like, what's been your favorite job? And he said, every job I've ever had, which was a great answer.
I think that's the kind of attitude that he would look for in a player, where he would want somebody that is just willing to be coachable, just happy to be there and willing to do, I'll take out the trash, coach. I'll do this, coach. And that was kind of the culture that he wanted to instill in the players. And that's a reflection. That answer is perfect. That he's like, yeah, I'm happy to be here. He's successful. He's at the top of his game, and he still is aware enough to say, I'm not above any job. I have many people around here that's making this whole program successful. It's not just about me.
Yeah. Well, he certainly credited lots of people for his, so to speak, success. That's for sure. I love your idea about being a coachable person and how many guys could really help their lives out a lot if they were coachable.
Yeah, it's hard. You know, it's hard to take advice and submit yourself to a leader. You know, that sometimes you're forced to do that, but in my experience, yeah, the more willing you are to do that, it can make life fuller and richer, make relationships deeper, and so I'm a big fan of that.
Yeah, for sure. And of course, I love his really good praising of Jim Tressel.
Mm,
You know,
hmm
how did Jim Tressel help you being the football coach? And those two guys were great together. And Coach Tressel, talk about one of the greatest coaches in college football ever, in my book at least.
Yeah, yeah, that was back in the heyday too, and Coach Russell is alumni at Baldwin Wallace as well, so that was another connection, and so yeah, he's definitely Ohio through and through.
Yeah, yeah, for sure. Well, let's talk about another coach. Let's talk about Coach K. We would be remiss to not talk about him down at Duke.
Oh my goodness, Coach K. I think that, some people, when we would explain this projects, whether it was to people like grandparents or people that weren't interested necessarily in college basketball, but were interested in us doing that. Coach K is someone, one of the few that was above basketball. Most people off the street wouldn't know who Thad Matta is, but most people know who Coach K is. It's like the equivalent of when you know, it's like you can say it's not LeBron James, it's just LeBron, or it's just Madonna. He's Coach K. Now that's part of that's because his last name's hard to pronounce, but he is, he has impacted. He's been the Olympic coach. He's just a great ambassador for the game, and we knew that he was toward the top of the pyramid in terms of when we put that original list together. If we would be able to get Coach K, holy smokes, that would be amazing.
Yeah, and you pulled it off.
We pulled it off. It was just, pulling it out of a hat, really. And it was one of those whirlwind weekends. And Coach K was just incredible. Not only the actual interview, but the after interview process. He invited us to a game down at Cameron Indoor, one of the premier college basketball arenas. To see a game there was amazing.
Yeah.
After that, we were invited to be a guest on his podcast. Speaking of, that was like really early on in the podcast game. He had written a book it was about leadership, and it was kind of like A to Z, and every letter represented a different theme. And on his theme of, it was F for friendship. And so he knew about our project and had met us a few times. And so he came back and interviewed us about how Andrew and I did this, our friendship, etc. So that's incredible to be able to, we were looking for a 10 to 15-minute interview, and it turned into much more than that. And so we're very thankful for his generosity as well.
Wow, that is incredible. Now he was at Duke for what, like 40 years?
Oh yeah, yeah. He had he was at Army, and but Duke is where he is known for, and he made a huge impact there. It's a relatively small school, and it's great academically, great medical school, but he turned that into a basketball powerhouse.
I had to laugh because back when Pope John Paul had died,
Hmm.
and then Cardinal Ratzinger succeeded him. There was, of course, bets on who was going to be the new pope, and one place I saw had actually put together a basketball bracket, and had all Cardinals from all over. But in one of the spaces was Duke, Duke in the papal bracket. That was hilarious.
That's great. Yeah, he's somebody that of course, people at University of North Carolina, the Tar Heels, love to hate Coach K, but I would say that for most people, he has a very high approval rating, and so yeah, he just is a special person, and we were fortunate to spend some time with him.
Well, I'd like to talk a little bit about some of his philosophies that he gave you. One of the questions that you ask pretty much every coach was about their recruiting, what they were looking for in recruits. And he said, I'm looking for great character. I'm looking for kids who have a respect for people and for the game. Think about that, about recruiting for character, not just skill.
Yeah, the first thing that comes to mind is how different it is now. In other words, with the NIL money and the transfer portal, you just wonder how much influence, they can have today on their opinions. In other words, Coach K looking for character, respect the game, but it's a different dynamic now. But if we go back 20 years and look at the span of his entire career, yes, again, I think that's kind of like what we talked about before, being coachable, that you are willing to say most players, especially if they're being able to talented enough to go to Duke, they have been the best player in almost every situation their entire lives. And so it would be easy for them to buy into that everyone's pumping them up and saying you're the best and you're great, you're the greatest, and people should roll out the red carpet for you. And, Coach K probably met with a lot of those players too, but I think that showing up differently and having those character traits, those, the willingness to say, I respect the game. I'm willing to submit to this process. I'm not going to come in here with a huge ego. And I think those were the people that he was trying to identify on the front end. Now, it probably didn't always work out the way he expected,
Yeah.
but if he could identify those character traits on the front end, it would be a formula for success.
Sure. Yeah, I agree 100% with that. Another question you asked him, which I really liked, was what's a typical day in the life of Coach K? And he said a typical day, as in there is no typical day, but the thing that he said was investing my time with my players, and I want those guys to know that they're important in my life, and I'm important in their life. I mean, the investment in players is what made him a great coach. There's no doubt about that.
Yeah, and that's going to show up differently on his daily schedule. He has different commitments for sponsorships and, book tours that he's trying to do on his own and, coaching the Olympics, et cetera. His investment in his players, it's similar. I mean, they're basically at work together. And so they want to make sure the work environment is healthy, and him being willing to invest in those relationships. I think that was the through line throughout all of this, was the leadership thing, influencing, boys to men, but also relationships and how important that is. And in this context, the relationship between player and coach, they got to know that, they're in the trenches together in terms of being on the hard court and traveling all the time. That's not a normal college experience. And so they're really putting trust in each other to make this work. And so you have to have that to make a long-term success, long-term relationship be successful.
Yeah, again, there's that theme of relationship, how important it is to invest in your players as whole men
Yeah.
and not just as a player per se. Yeah.
Yeah, and it's funny because like it's been a while since I read this book. It's been good to kind of go back down memory lane here. And so the questions that we ask, they're familiar, and yes, this book was about basketball. And as I reflect back on it, as I do occasionally, if somebody hasn't heard about it, it'll come up every once in a while. It is definitely the theme that I would take from it is, relationships, friendships, communication. Those things are what has stuck with me long term. And it wasn't a coincidence that the people at the top of the game, these coaches, they were masters at relationships and communication. And that is you're going to be successful in most industries with those two skills,
For sure.
and being able to recruit people in a very competitive environment and convince them to come along and play on my team, our team, and then be able to impact and influence them. It's a tough business. There's a lot of expectations, a lot of what have you done for me lately? And so they're kind of in it together, and they need to make sure that they have that synergy, and that comes down to relationships, as you alluded to.
Which are very difficult, which is why so many of us don't want to get involved with them.
No, I think that the default, it's easy not to. You have to be proactive. You have to be intentional in developing relationships, especially as you get older. When you're younger, you have the benefit of quantity time and quality time. So you're able to hang out in the dorm room. You talked about seminary. You're able to go to the coffee shops. And once things start entering into your life, like work and families and other things that are vying for attention, you don't have the benefit of as much of the quality and quantity time to have those relationships. So getting new relationships is, you're kind of going against the grain, and it takes two people to do that. And
Sure.
so that's something that is fascinating to me as I've gotten older, and it's something that you really have to work for.
For sure, yeah, that's certainly a topic that we've talked a couple of times on Guy Shrink with about the importance of cultivating friendships and how friendships change over your lifespan. Well, another coach that you guys interviewed, well, as it turned out, you didn't. Only Andy did this, and that was with Rick Barnes.
I think that was a situation where, as I talked about before, with my work and being recently married, there were times where the coach would say, "Yeah, we're going to be available on this date," and then they had to make a change, and then it
Yeah,
was, "Hey, I'm available now. Can you make it?" And so Andrew was available for the interview. I wasn't, and so it was one of those things that we didn't have. We weren't going to say, "Hey, Coach Barnes, can you work around Dave's
sure,
schedule?"
for sure, for
So
sure, yeah, yeah. So Rick was at Texas for a while,
yes,
and then
yep.
Tennessee.
Yes, that's correct. Yep. And he's been a lifer in terms of coaching, and he really loves the game. I did most of the, we kind of tackled the project where Andrew did, a lot of the writing of the chapters and kind of the data entry. And I did a lot of the transcribing of the interviews. So, just like with most things, you're able to take, sometimes where they were 60, 75-minute interviews and paring them down to be 2 or 3 pages in a book. I got to kind of be an observer, that I was there in spirit.
Yeah, yeah. But again, that question came up. Hey, coach, what would you like to see happen to these players because you're coaching them? And Rick said the same thing that everybody so far said, is that I want them to grow as people. I want them to grow as in every aspect of their life as good men.
Yeah, these coaches they have the benefit of being, in most cases, decades older than the players. Especially they're successful. They've probably been coaching for 30 plus years. So they've been able to see their journey of life and what it means to have the skills, have the personality, the character to be successful in life, because eventually basketball
Yeah,
ends.
yeah,
Their playing career ends. So they want to make sure that they left an impact on how to treat their employer well, the value of education. A lot of these coaches, they're teachers first. And so
hmm,
they're trying to teach their system, but they're also trying to teach players how to
hmm,
be, in this case,
hmm.
men.
Yeah. Coach Barnes said something in one of the questions you asked him that I thought was absolutely right on, and I really resonated with it. And Andy asked him about his what kind of fast break did he have in life? I think you guys call it the big break,
Mm.
and surprised me when I read it was volunteering. I got the big break by volunteering, which is not something that people kind of like normally think of volunteering. And
Yeah.
he said, yeah, guy, which I think he went to a camp, a basketball camp, I think is what happened originally. And he wanted to do something. And they just said, I'm going to go over there and volunteer at X. And then eventually ran the camp at Everett. Volunteering, how important that is as a guy to volunteer in an area you're interested in and see
Mhm.
what happens.
Yeah, we'll talk about a life lesson there. I mean, that ended up benefiting him tremendously. But the fact that when he started that, he didn't know how his career was going to play out. So he was willing for free to be around a game that he loves. And even if it never turned into anything, that again shows his character, his mindset to be able to say, "Hey, I guess I'll start here. I'm going to be coachable. I'm going to figure this out." And yeah, that speaks volumes of his approach, his personality, and that's going to be a reflection of his program as well, whether he's at Texas or Tennessee. That
Sure.
if you value volunteering or serving, that means that you think less of yourself, that you are willing to put yourself down and get into the weeds and roll up your sleeves and get things done for the betterment of your community. And that is a great way. I mean, I some of my best relationships, friendships have been formed by volunteering together. And so whether that's building a house or picking up leaves or something, yeah, it's impactful. So I agree with you that the fact that Coach Barnes said that is pretty incredible.
Yeah, the path to success runs through volunteering. That was and because we're talking here, Dave, I'm thinking of Robert Greene, who's another interesting guy.
Yes.
And Robert Greene, I think, is one of the most original thinkers I've ever read. But his book on mastery is again a masterpiece.
Yep.
And he talks about find something you love and invest. I don't think he specifically said go volunteer, but the idea is the same. If we take Coach Barnes's advice here about find something you love and start investing some time into that and see what happens out of it.
Yeah, I think that concept of compounding, my day job now is, I'm in financial planning, and we talk a lot about compounding interest. It's easy to see the numbers over time, but I think that's also true with experiences and relationships. If you go on a trip with family, you get the benefit of experiencing something, a beach, going out of the country or whatever it is. But that trip, that experience also has compound interest. So as time has gone on, my experience writing this book has had compound interest, and it has been an experience that has enriched my life. And so making those deposits, those investments early on, whether it's volunteering, relationships, investments, it's going to pay dividends in the future.
I agree with that too. Well, one other thing that I found really, really neat that Coach Barnes said, he said, somebody said, well, one of you guys asked about what would be kind of like life lesson. I think that was something like that. And the coach said, don't take yourself so seriously.
I can get a yes and amen to that. I mean, so much is just figuring things out. We don't know what's going on as we, if you're out driving and somebody, cuts you off, don't make assumptions. They may be having to rush to home to get to a family member. There's things that don't take yourself so seriously, whether it's in work. Yes, you want to do work, quality work, have quality relationships, but you also got to laugh a little bit, especially at yourself.
Very good. Well, let's talk about John Beilein a little bit. Okay. And you guys marked him as a favorite.
Yes. Coach Beilein, he, before you jump into some of his questions, we actually did 2 interviews with him. He was at West Virginia, and he had a very successful
north, right?
And the school up north, Michigan, up in Ann Arbor. So he had made that transition, and Coach Beilein, he is one of the most down-to-earth people. Incredible. He was so welcoming, and of course, Ann Arbor is a short trip from Toledo, and so we decided to do that second interview. And I will share too that John, even after the book came out, we did a book signing on Michigan's campus with him.
Really?
He opened up with Andrew. Andrew did some other additional projects with him during his tenure at the University of Michigan. Andrew's had dinner with him. I mean, Andrew, I don't want to speak for him, but would consider, John, a friend. And I think that's really special. Yes. Again, he has a teacher coach mindset, and the fact that we were kind of coming here with doing this project at that point, it had gone on pretty long, and he thought, yeah, I'm going to invest in this project too. So incredible guy.
Yeah. I want to come back to that business about teacher coach in a minute, because I really like that, because I found out that he taught a couple of classes at the School of Education at U of M in leadership. Leadership is coaching. And that's his philosophy about life right there.
Yeah. And I think that was a result of, he's had very successful, one of his, he was not recruiting always the top players, but he was able to extract the most, it seemed, out of all of the talent. Not necessarily a ragtag group of players, but essentially they were underdogs, and kind of having that scrappiness. He found a way, and he has an incredible basketball mind. But the fact that he was willing to teach and give back in that capacity as coaching leadership, teaching leadership, it's impressive.
Well, I heard him enunciate one of the principles that he has is leadership. When you guys asked the question about culture change at U of M, how does a coach change a culture? And he basically kind of said, well, you don't do anything at first, that's for sure. Which is not what a lot of people would think. A new sheriff in town, all new game. I want new people and all that. And Coach Beilein said, I need to settle in here first before I do anything.
Yeah, you want to be delicate. Going scorched earth, what is that going to do to the relationship? That I think is a breach of trust, honestly. That you come in, it takes time to get to know the people, not only the players, but also the staff. And, they're working a ton as well, and spending a lot of hours away from their family. And so I think his approach is very beneficial. And, it's no surprise that he was able to turn that around and turn Michigan into a
Oh yeah.
multiple trips to the Final Four, and very impressive.
Yeah, real miracles up there,
Hmm.
really. He
Yeah.
really did. He was a great coach. And then, of course, after he left Michigan, he went over to the Cavs for a little while, right?
Yes, and that wasn't as successful. It's making the transition. You know, it's definitely more of a business at
Oh,
the.
man, college is professional big time, man.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. So I was really intrigued when he made that jump, and I was really rooting for him. But yeah, he's had a successful career, and most people probably wouldn't think about as they look back on his career. That time of the Cavs was, yeah, kind of a blip on the radar.
Yeah, well, we also asked about the formula of success for him, and he talked about trial and error and failure. And
Mm.
sleepless nights. That was the other one that he said is sleepless nights.
Yeah, you don't want to. I think a lot of times, whether it's coaches or just people that are successful, or the perception of successful, I think they have it all figured out. But their success has been a decades-long journey of trial and error,
Yes,
and just being willing to get up and
yes,
try again, and have the humility to say,
yes,
"I'm going to raise my hand. I don't have it all figured out."
yes, yes. Do you know what's he doing right now? Do you know?
Last I heard, he was a consultant for the Pistons, and I don't know exactly, so I don't want to speak out of
No,
turn.
I think you're right. I think I heard the same thing. Yeah,
So
yeah. But what a gem of a guy. Great stuff.
yeah, we won't hold it against him that he was at the University of Michigan too.
No, I'm not because you're right. I mean, I do like to go up there. Of course, I see myself as a missionary for Ohio State. But
Yeah, yeah, a little
so
evangelizing.
I've kind of saved the best one for last, and the dean of all basketball, college basketball. The Wizard of Westwood.
Yeah.
So, and that is John Wooten, and what an absolutely wonderful model for manly leadership and sports there really is him. So tell us about the two of you driving to LA to do this, or flying to LA to do this.
Yeah, so all of our interviews were done with we're gonna hop in a Honda Civic, Honda Accord, sometimes sleep in the car, a shoestring budget. Once we were able to secure the interview with Coach Wooden, we weren't messing around. So we were able to get the flight out there, and this took place almost 1 year after our first interview.
Wow.
This was June of 2007 is when we met with Coach Wooden. And this was out in his home in Encino, California. So we were trying to save him for last as well. We had a couple interviews after that, but a lot of the coaches, either formally or informally, would reference Coach Wooden as somebody that impacted them directly or indirectly. And so he had an impact on all of the coaches because I believe he was 96 at the time when we met with him,
Yeah.
and so he was an institution of the game, and so many players and coaches look up to him, and he certainly left a huge impact. And so yeah, the story in the book, we flew out there, and we didn't take any risks. We arrived about an hour early, and we were within walking distance, and we eventually got there, and he lived by himself in a condo, and made his way down on the elevator, and he arrived out. He assisted with a cane, and he just welcomed us into his home as if we were longtime friends. And the fact that that was definitely a pinch yourself moment. The fact that somebody like this, that how many books have been written about him, and people look up to him, and his influence on the game is just tremendous. And we asked him our questions, and then we also probably spent another hour with him because he just wanted to hang out and talk about poetry and talk about his former players, and just an incredible moment in my life, and it was just something that was kind of the capstone to it all.
Definitely the capstone. So, what memorable thing did he say for you guys that really sticks? Because I've got some stuff here that when I read the book and reread the book,
Yeah, I think he had, like, I remember he had like a sportsmanship pledge. And I remember
yeah,
reciting that, and it's so simple. And I think that going back to the simple things in life, basketball is not a complicated game, and on the surface, it's just get the ball in the hoop, but there is an art to it,
yes,
and and there is a science to it as well. And isn't that true about most things in life?
Yes.
Relationships, friendships, the art and science of all of those things, and trying to marry those two concepts. I think about him just going through the list of former players that he would still get breakfast with. And
Yeah.
so
Yeah, he said that. Yeah.
that really impacted me. That it was it was beyond basketball for him. That he did impact those players. I think he referenced that, he started out coaching in high school in Indiana back in the 1930s. And
Yes.
so, a few years had passed, and they brought him back for a luncheon, and some of those players were in their 80s. And so he still was, have a relationship with them. It's just an amazing thing as you look at him living in such a full life, and having basketball kind of be the conduit for his impact.
Yes, yes, yes. I saw a picture shortly before he died. I think he was 99 when he died.
I think you're right.
And it had a picture of, at the time, Lou Alcindor,
Yes, yes.
a new player on the UCLA team, and him courtside, and John's in his suit and all, and Alcindor's in his uniform, and then jettison that, decades later, when shortly before his coach's death, that he's on a cane and hunched over, and there is Lou Alcindor. Well, you know,
Kareem, yeah.
Kareem,
Yeah,
holding him up and practically carrying him. And what a lovely, lovely picture, and the love that those two men had for each other is just phenomenal.
yeah, you're right. Love is a great word, and being able to, capture that in a picture speaks volumes. And
Yes, yes,
great.
yes. Well, you talked about the pledge. I got it right in front of me. We were invited to take his sportsman pledge, his oath, which can only be done in his presence. We raised our right hands and repeated after him. I'll be a good sport when I win or lose. No whining, complaining, or making excuse. I'll always keep trying 100% to give my best effort in every event. The sportsmanship pledge will bring out my best. Coach Wooden has taught me to be a success.
Yeah,
I love it.
yeah, I love that. It's like it's a little cheesy, and yet there's so many kernels of truth in there. Just how to approach life, approach your tasks at work, or your tasks or your relationships. It's just, yeah, it's. I got a good chuckle listening to you recite that as well.
Yeah, well, it's poetry, of course, and that's what makes it work. Is it's poetry, which he recited poetry to you, is what you said, for like
He
an
did.
hour.
He did, and I think that the one thing that, as I'm reflecting back on this too, is like his wife died. So we met with him in 2007. His wife died in 1985.
Really? Oh my gosh!
So we're talking,
Oh,
you know, decades, and he would tell a story about, something that he wished he would change. That was one of the questions we asked him, and I think that he didn't really say much about changing, the X's and O's of basketball or teaching. Is like the decisions I made there, I feel pretty comfortable with, but he was still reminiscing and maybe a little regretful about not going dancing with his wife. Just how that was still with him, and I think it almost, I think it brought him to tears thinking about
yes,
that, and just
yes,
how impactful that relationship was to him, and him investing in that, but also reflecting on maybe some missed opportunities. And I'm sure if his wife was still alive, he's like, oh, don't worry about it, John, that's fine. But he had the wherewithal to say, yeah, there were some things. I'm not perfect. I could have been there more.
yeah. But think of the trust he had for the two of you guys to tell you that.
Yeah, he was not gonna probably open the interview with that story.
Yeah,
So
right, right,
it took some
right.
some time, and be able to be there to hear that. That was really impactful, especially for me having been married just a few months before that. I definitely, that has stuck with me.
Yeah. Yeah, well, to kind of close out this conversation about Coach Wooden, I've got a couple of his books and read stuff about him, of course, because I remember in college, everybody loved him way back then,
Yeah.
100 years ago when I was in college, and
Mhm.
he has this Wooden's 7-point creed. I don't know if you ever heard it or not. His father had given him this when he graduated from grammar school. Now,
Wow.
grammar school back in those days was first grade through eighth grade. Now we've got all kinds of other names for it. But anyway, this was it. Be true to yourself. 1, be true to yourself. 2, make each day a masterpiece. 3, help others. 4, drink deeply from good books, especially the Bible. 5, make friendships a fine art. 6, build a shelter against a rainy day. And 7, pray for guidance and give thanks for your blessings every day.
That is rich. That is deep. That is amazing. I mean, the fact that you can really unpack any one of those. I'm sure maybe in your former life as a preacher, you could do a nice sermon on all seven, or just one of those, that 7-week series on that. It's a really, that is a great approach, and it's not a surprise, hearing that again, how amazing that is.
Yeah, and of course his life just epitomized every one of those points.
Yeah, and do you? I would say he would be the first to admit that on a given day or a given year, he would fall short in those areas. But it doesn't mean it's not beneficial to have those as aspirational things. And sometimes, depending on what season you're in, it's going to be, I'm excelling in this particular point and I'm falling short over here. But
Yes.
it's a journey, and
Yes.
it's not a destination.
Yeah, for sure. Well, Dave, I got a couple more questions for you.
Yeah.
Thanks. It was great conversations about these 5 coaches. But so how did this opportunity that you and Andy have, how do you think it sharpened your skills of interviewing and listening to other people?
Yeah, I think that it would be interesting to look back if we could go into the room with Coach Pitino to see, of course, how nervous we were and the questions we asked. And over time, we tried to be consistent with the questions, but of course, yeah, you learn along the way to, really listen, give feedback, and make sure that you're engaged in the process. I love asking questions in general. I think that's the antidote to assumptions, where, be curious, not judgmental, where you are really trying to say, I don't know what that person is going through today. And maybe I can pique my curiosity by asking a question or helping out, or, I mean, I had the opportunity, but withhold judgment a little bit on that. So I think that, again, we were still in school, and when the book came out, we had just graduated. So we spent about 9 months on the road too, doing book signings and going back to the college campuses to speak to some of the classes. And it just kind of really accelerated me being comfortable in front of people that are successful, or comfortable in front of public speaking type of things. So I don't pretend to be an expert or have it all figured out. I just think that it kind of, being behind the scenes, again, people are people, and it humanized the stars and the celebrities in my life to say, we're all trying to figure it out, and everyone's on a different timeline.
Okay.
And it would be a good thing to just ask questions, listen, don't interrupt, that type of thing.
Okay. So thanks. So while you and Andy are on the road, what do you think happened, number one, to you in this process as far as growth as a guy and your friendship with Andy? What do you think happened in that year and a half that you guys were on the road?
Yeah, it was an appreciation for relationships, and the fact that it was, it was our project, but it ended up being bigger than any one of us, and that we were trying to get this thing across the finish line. And there were times where, there was friction, of course, and whether it was, being our availability or just our vision for what the project would look like. And, that was something that we, I'm sure we didn't deal with perfectly. We definitely didn't deal with it perfectly while we were going through it. But our friendship survived. And I think that we're deep closer as a result of it. And we have that now. We have that experience together. Just like volunteering, you have that joint project. And when I see Andrew now, or I talk to Andrew, which I'm fortunate to do regularly, yes, we don't really talk about the book much anymore. It comes up every once in a while, but it definitely is something that has enriched both of our lives, and we're better off for it. So I think that in the short term, it made me more comfortable to, be around people, and just kind of, we're all trying to figure it out, and just being able to kind of get in there and ask questions, and be coachable, and do all those things. And then in the long term, just the impact, the value of relationships, and more specifically friendships.
Okay. So the second to last question then, how do you think this experience of of doing the interviews, writing the book, reflecting on it, has formed you as a man, as a guy?
Yeah, I think that it has formed me to think about, there are different seasons of life. And this season of doing the project was an incredible thing. It's like in the title, it's a once in a lifetime experience. But
Mm-hmm.
that wasn't the end of my journey. I could, sit back and think, oh, I accomplished this thing really early on in my life. But it was just as you extend your life out, it was just one small thing on my journey. And I think that it shaped me in a way that, you know, people are willing to look out for you and people are willing to help you along the way. And those people that are willing to help are sometimes obvious, but sometimes in a way that surprises you. And so keeping your mind open to new experiences, but also not rushing to judgment or rushing to I think this is how it's going to play out. Hey, people can surprise you, and I think that leading with giving people the benefit of the doubt, I think is something that I took away from this experience, and I hope to continue to apply in my life.
Right. That's really good, Dave. So how can people get a hold of the book?
Yeah, I think that destination basketball. It may be limited quantities available on Amazon. I think the price is pretty high. So fortunately for your listeners, I have some copies that I'd love to share. So if happy to share my information if they'd like to reach out to me directly.
Just send me bill@guyshrink.com. Okay. And if you want a book from Dave, just give me an email, forward it to him. He'll be in contact with you and you can get a book from him.
That sounds great. Yep, I love that, and we'd be happy to share that. And I appreciate the opportunity to expand on that and go down memory lane today with you, Bill.
Yeah, we'll reiterate that again in the show notes at the beginning of the thing, and then bill@guyshrink.com, and I'll get it, and then I'll forward to Dave, and he'll reply to you. Okay, last question. We're in an elevator. We jump in the elevator. We're gonna go down a couple of floors of 20 seconds to get down to the bottom, and the door's shut, and there we are in the elevator together. Yikes! The elevators. What's your elevator speech about today's conversation about basketball and leadership and being a guy? And so what's a parting thought you want me and our listeners to take home?
So before I say my 20 seconds, I hope this doesn't eat into it. My tendency, what I want to do is ask you questions. That's what I really want to do. I want to turn the microphone on to you, put you in the hot seat, but that's not the question you asked. So I would say that in my short time, that in 20 seconds, I would say life is simple, but not easy. And think about who you would want to become and take one simple step today. You want to be a better friend? Text your friend. If you want to work out more, go on a walk. It doesn't have to be this big grand thing. Just go out and do one thing today that gets you closer to be the person that you want to be.
Okay. Well, David, thank you so much. Guest today, David Bensch. And we had a great conversation about a book that he's authored called Destination Basketball. We interviewed the best coaches of college basketball, 20 years now, but it's really great men. And it's a great book. And we've had a great conversation about why a guy needs to pay attention to himself a little bit more. So thanks for listening to Guy Shrink. And we'll see you the next time. Bill@guyshrink.com. If you have any questions, comments, or you want a copy of the book, enjoy today. Thanks a lot for listening.